Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking to you about the PowerPoint NVQ evidence. Okay, and this is for portfolio building. This is going to be part one of two videos that I'm going to put together for you to help you with gathering your evidence and presenting it in a format that will make it easier for you to complete your NVQ portfolio. So I'm going to crack straight on and we'll go to slide one. And the question is, what is evidence? Okay, so portfolio evidence is all about you proving to an independent assessor that you've carried out an operation in the work environment and have proved competence. So this video really is concentrating on how you gather that evidence and just as importantly, what constitutes evidence. Okay, so oftentimes when collecting evidence, we know that we've done the work, but that doesn't always show in your portfolio. It doesn't show that it's your work that's presented for assessment. Remember, it's all about evidence. So you have to prove to the assessor that you carried out the work to meet the criteria. Now, for us to do this, these are just hyperlinks, we have various types of evidence that we can gather. Okay, and one of the most important really, I think, is photographic evidence. Photographs are a great way to gather evidence, but there are some points that ensure the photo constitutes evidence. Okay, so number one, wherever possible, make sure you're in the photo. And we're not talking about a case of you holding up a piece of cable where all we can see is your hand and the cable. Okay, selfies are not really a great idea because obviously you're concentrating on holding a phone in one hand, trying to take a photograph in the other. So really you need somebody with you to take your photograph of you carrying out an activity. Now, the truth of the matter is you are apprentices, so therefore you should not be working alone. You should have somebody with you. You know, your qualified sparks, and it's easy enough to ask them, can you just take a photograph of me while I'm carrying out this operation? For that, you can use your phone, of course, but you need to be in the photograph. Ideally, you'd be looking into the camera when the photograph is being taken, and this way we can verify that's you. Photographs showing the back of your head, that kind of thing, it's very difficult to tell who the photograph is of. So we need to make sure the photograph you take is of you and you're carrying out the activity that you're going to claim evidence on. Okay, make sure you're wearing the correct PPE, and if you're not wearing PPE, you're probably breaking health and safety. So when you have your photograph taken, you need to be wearing the correct PPE for that job. For that job, you should probably be submitting a risk assessment, and you should be wearing PPE that complies with that risk assessment. Okay. The other thing you need to make sure of is anyone in the picture is also wearing the correct PPE. So often we see photographs of the apprentice in full PPE, looking really great, and then in the background you've got people wearing shorts, t-shirts, trainers, all that kind of thing. So that doesn't really lend well for your evidence, because why would you be the only one wearing PPE? It shows that it's not actually, you know, you've probably just dressed up for the picture. So don't include anybody in the background who's not wearing PPE. This one happens more times than you can mention. So make sure that if there are people around you that are not wearing their PPE, make sure they're not in your photograph. Okay. Try to make the photograph date stamped. Okay, so there should be a facility on your phone to actually put a date stamp in the corner of the photograph. So as an example, if you've done a job on 10th of October, then a date stamp on the bottom of the photograph saying the 10th of October brings that photograph in line with other evidence that you're gathering for a job you did on a given day, or if it's a longer job, over the given days of the job. Okay, so make sure you date stamp your photograph, and we can correlate that with the job, and we can say, yes, there's a photograph taken on that day, on that job, carrying out that activity. Okay, so another form of evidence we can have is witness testimony. Witness testimony is a solid form of evidence whereby a suitably qualified witness can work with you and provide a statement that you've worked to industry standard. At the beginning of your portfolio, there is a sheet where you can log people down as your official witnesses for your portfolio. And in that, they will provide a sample signature that we can match with any testimony that they've supplied. So hopefully they've watched you work, they've created a statement of what you've done, and then they can sign the bottom of the sheet. If the signatures match up, then that becomes your witness testimony, and you can enter that into evidence that you've met the criteria that you're trying to claim and that you did the job. Okay, your witness must be suitably qualified as an electrician. So the witness must be logged into the portfolio as having the relevant qualifications and experience, and have provided a sample signature. The witness statement must be signed and dated. Okay, you must ensure the criteria claimed is evidenced in the statement. So if you've got a statement that says you've used PVC twin and earth as an example, and you're going to claim that as a cable type, then when we read your evidence, it will state that you did use PVC twin and earth, and that way you can then claim the criteria. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Product of work. Now this one's an interesting one. Product of work can take many forms and can include written work or physical work that you have carried out. So written work could include things such as risk assessments. One of the big ones for one of the units is when you're carrying out test and inspect, there are test and inspect sheets that you will be filling out, that you will be signing. So when you do that, you just take a copy, put that into your portfolio, and you can reference that as evidence under product of work. Okay. Copies of documents must be included in the portfolio. It is not enough to say that you have done it. So if you have worked to a risk assessment, then the risk assessment goes into your portfolio. You reference that as evidence, and then you can claim the criteria on it. Other things included for product of work could be manufacturer's data. Okay, so if you have manufacturer's data, include that into your portfolio of work, and again you can then claim against that. Physical work could be a statement documenting the steps taken to perform your work, and this would normally be accompanied with photographic evidence. So if we have, so you can see what we're trying to build here is a picture of you doing the work. So there will be manufacturer's data from the job. There will be photographs of you doing the work. There will be statements of you doing the work. There'll be risk assessments that you've complied with, method statements that you've complied with. All of this builds very solid evidence that this is your work. Okay, so let's move on. Professional discussion. Professional discussion would take place between the assessor and the apprentice. It's usually used where there are gaps in evidence, or it is difficult to evidence. Sorry, gaps in evidence, or it's difficult to evidence in other ways, and would typically be a description of the job and questions related to your work. Okay, so where we would normally carry out professional discussion can take place in the workplace in conjunction with a site visit. So part of our remit is to come and do site visits, where we will come and have a look, and there's a section on that one, where we come and watch you carrying out activities in the workplace. And at the end of that, we could then sit down somewhere and we could have a talk about some of the areas that you're finding it difficult to gather evidence. So if it is difficult for us to gather evidence, we can sit down and we can have a professional discussion, and we can gather it through talking about the topic. Okay. What we can't do is fill a portfolio with professional discussion. Okay, so this is purely there for us to fill up the gaps. Now we can also carry out professional discussion using modern technology such as Zoom meetings. The one thing you should note that because we're going to be recording these meetings, that everything that's recorded is kept in accordance with GDPR, which is the new data protection regulations. So that won't be released to anybody. You will be given a copy and the criteria that's been met through professional discussion. Okay, so observation. This was something I referred to a moment ago. Observation takes place when an assessor observes you in your workplace. The observer will make arrangements to meet with you on site. The observer will watch and take notes of work being performed, and a report based on the observed work will be returned to the apprentice along with the criteria that have been met. So one of the areas that we will absolutely come and observe you is carrying out test and inspect. Okay, we will make other visits, but again, it's important to note you cannot complete your portfolio on observation alone. Okay, so you can't pass all the responsibilities over. So that's the observation. We'll meet you on site. We'll watch you for an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. The assessor will make notes on the work that you're carrying out, and from that, you'll receive a report from the assessor with criteria that you can claim for your portfolio evidence. Now, photographs. As I said earlier, photographs are an important form of evidence for us to gather, and we have to be careful in what we're trying to present. Okay, so on the screen there, you've got two photographs of an outside light. Those on their own do not constitute evidence. And the reason they don't constitute evidence is because there's no reference to them. Okay, there's no one, you can't see anybody working on it. These are photographs that could have come off of the internet. Okay, so these photographs on their own would not be considered as evidence. And the reason for this is there's no reference to the person claiming it as their own work. They could simply be downloaded from the internet. They can, however, be used. So don't discount photographs like this. They can be used to support valid evidence. And we'll see how we can do that in a little while. Okay, so now we have a good example of photographic evidence. Okay, so photographic evidence should always include you in the picture unless there are security issues. So if you're on some MOD sites, that kind of thing where it might be difficult to take photographs, then obviously that comes first. But you would then state that in your job write-up that you were unable to get photographs because it was an area of sensitivity, as an example. Okay. Where the picture evidence includes a photograph of yourself, you need to make sure you're complying with all the relevant site rules and risk assessment requirements. So for this photograph here, you would have provided a risk assessment which shows the PPE that's required on that site. So I would expect to see a risk assessment that says you would need to be wearing your high-vis, hard hat, gloves and boots as a minimum. Okay, so I can look at the photograph, reference your risk assessment. Yes, he's complying with that risk assessment. So now the PPE evidence is completed. Also, as mentioned earlier, check the background of the photograph to ensure that anybody in the frame is complying with health and safety regulations. Okay, in this instance, there's nobody in the background, so it's absolutely fine. Try to ensure the photo has a date stamp, and if you look at that photograph and you look at the bottom, you can see 10/10/19, giving you an indication of when that photograph was taken. And this clearly is not evidence that you could present. I don't think there's any compliance with health and safety there at all. Okay, and quite often, surprisingly enough, we do see photographs like this being presented as evidence. Okay, so this is a photo of someone working, but is it evidence that can be submitted into the portfolio? Well, no, it's not. Okay, and if you want to take a minute, how many breaches of health and safety can you spot? I think the flip-flops is a nice touch, but there you are, that's me. Okay, so now we go on to written statements. Almost the meat and potatoes of evidence gathering, really. The written statement gives the apprentice the opportunity to produce a piece of work which details all the operations undertaken while on a job. And the advantage of this is that one job has the potential to maximize evidence gathering and thus allow you to claim more criteria. The apprentice can produce a written statement provided it is supported by 1, a counter signature by a qualified person, which states that the statement is a true reflection of your actions and the statement is dated. Okay, so you can, this is when we're talking about the job write-ups. And again, we've got a couple of examples, so I'm just going to move on to that. Now, this one is a model statement. This is what we would like to see. Okay, at the top you can see it's labeled as job number 2. It may also be useful to put onto there an evidence number. So it could be job number 2, evidence 1. And so you'll have a section on your portfolio, job 1, job 2, job 3, etc. And within that job, you'll have the evidence that you're going to provide. So this would be job number 2, and this would be evidence 1. Okay, so I'm just going to run through it very, very quickly. You'll see that the first thing we've got up there is an address, 362 Bradford Walk, Chelmsford, CM7 6XY. Okay, then there's a brief, in this instance, a very brief description of the job that's going to be carried out, which is supply and fit outside lighting to garage, and a date that the job was carried out. So 10/10/2019. So if we look at the statement itself, there's many points I'm going to want to make with this. So the wiring for the outside light had been installed the day before by our first fix team. So that's just really setting the scene. My electrician and me went back to fit the light fittings and connect the wires. I was asked to do this under the supervision of my electrician. So now we start looking at the evidence that we're going to be gathering. So firstly, I asked if I could see the risk assessment to check if I needed to wear PPE. This would be backed up by submitting a risk assessment. And of course, that could then be labeled job 2, evidence 2. Okay, there's a place where we can log this down. So your risk assessment could be job 2, evidence 2, and we reference that on the sheets later on. This told me that for this job I should have high vis, boots, gloves, hard hat, and glasses. To get to the position of the light, I knew I would need to use step ladders. I asked if we had fiberglass steps, but was told it would be okay to use alley steps because it was not going to be made live. And he showed me the wires not connected at the fuse board. So here's an opportunity now to start thinking about what checks you could do on the ladder. So you might want to include, if it's if you're using ladders or that kind of thing, just put in a photograph of the scaff tag that could go in, and that might be evidence 3. I checked the ladders anyway, making sure they were not damaged and were safe to use. My electrician said he wanted to fix the base to make sure it was straight, and this he did using a drill and masonry bit. So that's his evidence, that's not yours. You're not claiming to have used the masonry bit. I went up to the light and found two 1.5mm twin and earth PVC cables. So now you can reference the criteria for one of your cable types, twin and earth PVC. Cables supplying the light, I stripped them back using an electrician's knife, exposing the inner PVC covered cores. So now you're using the correct method to terminate those cables. I then tested the cable ends to make sure the conductors were not live. And for this, I used an approved voltage tester and a proving unit. Okay, so we're heading towards making sure that the circuit is not live before you're working on it. I measured the cables so that the cores would lay flat and were long enough to reach the connector block. And when you mention connector block there, you could be talking about a screw termination. I then stripped the ends using a set of cable strippers and terminated them into the connector block using my insulated screwdriver. Okay, so now you're talking using the correct tools for the job. Again, you're meeting criteria there. There were two conductors for the live, neutral and earth, one of them being supplied from the switch, the other went off to another outside light. I had done that to my electrician. Once I'd done that, my electrician checked the terminations and they were good. I then fitted the light fitting onto the base using two dome nuts which had a machine thread. So now we're talking about fixings and different types of fixings. It clearly wasn't a wood screw, but it was a machine screw. So now you're talking about you know, your different terminations again. So we're talking screw threads. And for this, I used a spanner. My electrician was pleased with the job, and we did the other light the same way. And when we'd done, the electrician tested the circuit and connected the wires into the consumer unit. And what we've got, if we get to the bottom, this is a draw account of work carried out. It's signed by the apprentice, and it's given a date. Okay, so the job happened on the 10th and 10th, but it took about a week to get the statement together. So that was dated a little bit later, and then it's countersigned. Okay, so this is a named signatory, Alf Davis, 20. So it took him a few days to do that. 2010-19, and he's the supervisor, and he must be on the list of approved witnesses. So now you've got a statement of work done, and we bring it all together. Sorry, I'm just going to talk about this this statement here, and this is similar to what we get quite often, but it's not really providing much in the way of evidence. So again, it's got job 2, and it's got outside light as its brief description of the job. It's got an address, 362 Bradford Walk, Chelmsford, and it's got the address. There's no date to it, so we don't know when this was worked out, this job was done, so we can't really say whether this job is current. And if we read through it, it says, my job was to fit up an outside light to the garage. The wire was sticking out of the wall when I got there, so my Sparky said he would put the base up and let me connect it. First, I got the gear out of the van and set up to do the work. He started by measuring where the light would go and drilled the brick wall and put wall plugs in. He then screwed up the base and left the wire poking out for me to connect it up. Right, so up to this point, there is no evidence. This is everything your electrician's done, and it doesn't explain anything that you've done for yourself. So we're left with about 4 lines of work that you've carried out. First, I cut the wire back and stripped it using my croppers. So we're not using the correct tools, leaving the cables bare. I then cut the cables down and screwed them into the connector block. So you've got terminations there. When I did that, I screwed the light up and my sparks tested it and turned it on. The lights worked all right, so I packed up the tools before we went to another job. So effectively, you might get terminations. There's no reference to PPE, there's no reference to risk assessments, method statements, all of those important parts of actually doing the job. Okay, so I accept this is a particularly bad version of it, but it's not unusual to see that and handed in as a statement of work that you'd carried out. And what this does is it tends to leave too many assumptions. And as an assessor, we're not allowed to assume. You have to tell us. Okay. And the amount of times you have conversations with, yeah, but you can see, or you can see this, and you, well, yeah, but I have to assume, and I'm not allowed to assume. You have to kind of try and treat me as if I know nothing, and explain what you're doing. Okay, so this one is in stark contrast to the first one. So holistic evidence gathering. Holistic makes it sound almost a little bit scary, but it's not. All it's really saying is that from that one piece of evidence that you've submitted, you can claim criteria across multiple units. Okay, so often we'll get a job that is given as evidence. So we'll say it's job number 2, and all the apprentice is trying to claim out of that is PPE. Now this makes hard work for the apprentice, because if you are looking at a job you're doing and all you're going to claim is PPE, you're going to have to go through many jobs to gather all the evidence for all the criteria. So what you could see from that first example of the outside light is, when you look at everything that was talked about in the job write-up, yes, you've got health and safety with your PPE. Yes, you've got risk assessments, because that's evidence number 2. Number 3, you could have technical information. When you get these outside lights, I'll leave that one for the next one, but you can gather evidence from that one job across multiple units that you're trying to claim. So in that one job, there is an awful lot of evidence to be gathered. And so I'm going to look at it in this way. So this is job number 2. Okay, now I've included, I haven't put a template for a risk assessment or anything like that, but that would be evidence 2, 3, whatever. So looking at this now, I have the statement, which is signed by myself, and it's got a counter signature. That tells you all the operations that I carried out. You can see then it's backed up by the photographs. And this is where I said, if you take the photograph on the right, which on its own doesn't constitute evidence, but when you put it with the other photograph, you can see the guy on the ladder, you can see him holding the light fitting. We then have a close-up of the light fitting, which gives us the fact that we can see that it's been supplied by a PVC twin and earth. We can see that the cables have been correctly identified, because we've got earth sleeve on the earthing cable, so we've got cable identification. You can see that it's a normal screw termination connector block, so we can claim that from our criteria. We can also see that the screws that fit the top of the light onto the base are machine screws. We know we'll have dome nuts on those, so we can see that from the evidence. We can see the access equipment in terms of the steps. So you can see from that, once we back that up, it's starting to look like very convincing evidence, and there would be very little doubt that you were the guy who did this job. The other thing I was going to mention in the previous slide is manufacturer's data. So on this situation that there are 2 light fittings fitted. So if you were going to leave a set of instructions with the client, that still leaves you 1 set of instructions that would normally go in the bin. Don't throw it in the bin, submit it as evidence. Okay, so this is going to be referring to the fact that you used technical information when you installed this outside light. So what we really need to get to is a place where we can absolutely claim the maximum from your evidence. And if you've claimed those criteria, when the assessor comes in and look at it, if it doesn't quite meet the requirements for evidence, then he will let you know, and that will be discounted, and you can go back and look for that evidence. Okay. So that, folks, is the end of that portfolio building PowerPoint. I hope the explanations helped you out. Okay. The one thing I would say to you is, if you collect your evidence, if you work to this, you will collect an awful lot of evidence with the minimum effort. And for yourself, for your assessor, whoever that assessor might be, and don't forget that it's not just your immediate assessor that has to be pleased with your work. Your assessor's work will also be assessed. Okay, so we're very, we have to do a proper job, because somebody's going to come in and assess our assessment. Okay, so you're doing it kind of for everybody. Okay, so I hope that helps. That's the end of video 1. I'm going to put video 2 now, and you can then get a little bit more information on how to transfer this evidence that you've gathered into your portfolio. So I'll see you soon.